leaders are enlisted as champions. What we want to do this morning is to have a dialogue with local elected officials and hopefully provide some insight into how best to engage your local elected leadership, to build relationships with community leaders, to work toward a common understanding among stakeholders, and learn the do's and don'ts to maximize the chances for effective implementation. As Chris mentioned, I've had the opportunity to kind of be on that side of thing for it's 18 years this month. And what I find is that people all seem to know that, elected officials are important, or they all believe elected officials are important for anything they want to get done. But they don't necessarily always know exactly why it is they're important. And sometimes what they think the elected official's role is, or how things work, is not entirely wrong, but not entirely in focus either. And many, I've found in my experience as an elected official, many times, people who are doing a lot of good work to move any particular cause forward, they know their issue really well, and they have good arguments, but they don't necessarily know how to effectively engage the elected leadership in a way that will make it more likely they can get what they want, even when elected officials are sympathetic. So hopefully we can provide a little insight that will be useful to you in your work. And what I'm going to do is start with a set of questions that I'm going to pose to the group here and hopefully get a conversation going. And after we've talked about those for a while, we'll go to your questions. So I believe we have a couple of handheld mics, do we not? We may need one right now for up here. Even two would be easy, and then we'll send at least one of them around the room. So this is your warning, alert, to begin thinking about the question that I didn't ask that you really want to have raised, and be ready. And almost as soon as somebody's waving their hand, I'll try to get out and get the question out to the room. But I'm going to start by throwing out something for the group to discuss, and I will start by starting with Mayor Randleman, since I gave her the earliest alert about this, so she's had more time to think about it. What I want you to address a little bit, if you would, Ruth, how should advocates for anything, such as the kind of work we're talking about here, think about the best way to partner with an elected leader on something, on a project or policy initiative that's already been funded, something that's not a brand new thing, it's something presumably they know about. A lot of times you'll have something where there's already been action, so officially people are on board. But there's actually a whole lot of work that has to be done. And I sometimes find that folks think that they're done now. They passed it off to you, and okay, now make things happen. So I'd like you to address that a little bit. If you've got something that maybe there's an initial plan that's already been approved, but there's a lot that has to do, what do the people who've been working on it need to do to effectively work with you?
Yeah, even though I've had time to think about it, that can get complicated. I think once something's in the queue and you're ready to go, meeting the ground is a little bit different than advocating for the concept. You have to keep the steam up. And as an elected official, I got great staff in Carlisle, and we encourage them to be realistic with us. Don't over-exaggerate the problem or gloss over what some of the problems of the project may be. We also I think as elected officials, these gentlemen can speak to this, but we like the citizens that advocated, or whoever advocated initially that the project was a good concept, to have our backs and stand with us when we continually try to stay positive and focused and keep the momentum up. So I think it's anybody involved with maybe a project to keep the steam up, keep us updated, keep communicating, have the conversations. If there is a glitch, we want to know it. If there's something really good going on, we want to know that too. And like I said, realism when it gets on the groundwork is important. In a small community, maybe this doesn't play out in every community, but we also have citizens involved with our projects. And when things start to happen and the pushback starts to come, we like those citizens to express their opinions and express their problems, but also keep realistic with us and positive. If you were an advocate to start with, stay with us. If you were an advocate and there's some problems with other members of the community, please be involved with conversations with them. One thing one maybe don't is, as an elected official, nobody in this room would do this, but I don't like to get, if there's, for instance, we had a project with 2 neighborhoods. I don't like anyone from the situation. One neighborhood had one opinion on this project, the other had another, that pits people in the community against each other. That's not a good approach for an elected official. I bring the mentality of a mother of 4, grandmother of 7 to the table. I love them all equally. Now, with any of us, there's sometimes when one of those is in better standing than the other, but we really, I think, as much as people may not believe this, we try to be as fair as possible, and we represent every single person in that community, and we want to keep it fair and above board, and everybody just working together realistically.
So I heard a couple of different things, one of which was stay in touch.
Yes.
And the last one is another key one to remember, that the lines that some people who are advocating for things see are not necessarily the same lines that you can see, and you don't necessarily want all those lines sharpened. Mr. Reed?
First, thanks for having us here this morning. I really appreciate having the opportunity to engage in these discussions. And thanks to Smart Growth America and the Sustainability Institute. Let's give them a round of applause. This has been a great conference so far. I don't know about you, but it's been great for me. But one of the things that I would add, I thought the mayor did a great job of covering those things, because everything she talked about is just so significant. Because if you think about the role of the elected official, we're out in the community, we're talking to neighborhood organizations, we're talking to residents on a daily basis. And if we don't have the information, if we are out of sync with what you're doing on the project, real quickly things can get out of line, and it can, you know, to potentially jeopardize the outcome of the project. So I think it's really important that you keep the elected official informed as to the progress of what you're involved in. I think it's really important that, like the mayor said, not deliver different messages to differing neighborhood organizations and then deliver a different message to the elected official, because, you know, we would be out there, you know, giving updates to the, you know, neighborhood organizations, and real quickly, once the public isn't behind it, it can really, as you know, mess things up in a bad way. But also, I think it's really important that you do your research. You know, if you're not involved directly with the elected official, and you're looking to engage with the elected official on some issue, I think it's important that you do your research to understand how that process takes place within the prospective city or the municipality that you're working in.
Yeah, that actually is an important issue I want to come back to. I'm glad you raised that, because there is a lot of variation. But first, let me go to...
Yeah, I want to do a follow-on, too, and this applies in both cities I've been in. It's kind of interesting. There's a roar going on, and now brought on by the internet, okay? So let's say that we pass a sustainability issue. And just pick it, whatever community you're in. And I don't think it's totally understood, okay? So you support it, and all of a sudden, the social media takes over, okay? And this sucker has a life all its own. You know what I'm talking about, don't you? And so your city council or the vote comes up, and you look out there and you're looking for support, okay? Now, you know the people there, the tendency of a lot of folks who support what we stand for is they're doing a great job. I really like what they're doing, and I'm not going to go down there because I'm going to do something else tonight. So I guess what I'm saying is that there needs to be that constant communication to let us know that we have, so it gets lonely sometimes, okay? And you know you're doing the right thing, Tom, but you still need to have that kind of communication. And if you look at any of our calendars today, you know that we are getting hit with many, many different issues. And your support and communication is critical. And we've all got great staffs. I mean, and I think that's the key to getting things done. And I'm very proud of our staff, but we really need to hear from you along the way.
Yeah, I think, you know, before I go to Mr. Ford, the way in which the media, not just social media, but really the internet has transformed things. I happen to have been first elected in 1996, which is the year of the Telecommunications Act. It was just right before everybody had internet, right? You know, one day it was a thing in the newspaper where they were arguing about whether there were really, 3 million users in the world, right? And the next year it was irrelevant because there were a few billion. And the way that changed the work we do was dramatic. I mean, at least where I am, and I don't know what you found, but it went from where you got mail and you got letters. Some of them were handwritten, or they were typed, and they expressed their concern, and you'd get it a few days after somebody sent it, and then you'd send back a letter saying, "Thank you very much, Mrs. Jones. I'm going to look into this issue, and I'll, get back to you." And 3 or 4 weeks later, you get something back from staff, and then you'd send off a letter, and 6 weeks after the individual inquiry, Mrs. Jones got a response, and she said, "I wrote my, council member, board member, and I got a response." Whatever it said, heard back from an elected official. And then almost overnight, it got to where you get an email message, and you instantly have something going back that says, "Thank you for your message. We're looking into it. Get back to you." And 48 hours later, you get something saying, "I sent you a message 2 days ago and I haven't heard a thing yet." So the level of expectation, and of course the sheer volume of those, has really changed things. And then as you were saying, an issue's out there. And again, the news cycle has changed so much so that, 20 years ago they were talking about the 24-hour news cycle with CNN. Now the 24-hour news cycle is true in every town in America because it's all over the internet. So I'm taking it from the nods. That isn't just my experience, but that's
Go ahead.
It just to follow on to that, back to Covington, it was the morning paper, the mail, and the evening paper. That's over with. I mean, and now it's constant. I mean,
constant.
You're right.
now from the perspective of a relatively newer elected official.
Oh, yeah, Tom and I go back. Not way back, but back. Yeah. We're both affiliated with the Tennessee Municipal League, where not only we look at local issues that affect our towns and cities and whatnot, but we also look at issues that affect us as an entire state. Whether you're from West Tennessee or Middle Tennessee or East Tennessee, regardless of the demographic and regardless of the political affiliations, we all have at least one area where we can work together. But to go back to the question, and a good segue, Mrs. Zimmerman, these 2 phones that I have, since I've been up here, I've already got about 6 emails.
Right.
But you are correct when you say that the technology has changed to where the expectations for elected officials have changed. One thing that I am a big proponent of is accountability, not just for elected officials, but I also want to make sure that those who elect us in are also accountable as well. And I say this threefold. One, does the constituent know all of his or her representatives? Let's take Memphis, for example. We have a city government and a county government. The city council gets probably a little bit more press than the county commission, unless the county commission is yelling at each other all the time, but they may get those 2 or 3 minutes on the news. But when you look at projects, just like what the mayor was talking about earlier, you want every single individual who is not just a local representative of you to be involved and to get the information. You want the collective group to be involved, which goes to number 2. Number 2 is we have to make sure that when things are brought into place, just like with the city council, we're the legislative body, so we're the ones that actually have to pass the money. that funds these projects. I serve with 12 other individuals. We have 12 different personalities. You might have some that say, well, you know what, it's good for Memphis, so I'm going to support it. You might have the individual that says, well, this is not in my district, so I'm going to vote no. So you have all of those dynamics that fight each other. And then the third thing is when the constituents come back to me and say, well, I don't like how this person did this, that, and the other. I'm like, well, you elected us in. You can also go back to the to the booth and say, well, I don't like what you did because of X, Y, and Z. You have to actually illustrate. You have to inventory everything, and you have to make us accountable. I tell people all the time, I'm the type to where I tell my business all the time. I tell people, I voted no on this because of this, so if you don't agree with me, you tell me now, we can agree to disagree. But you have some individuals that might not. I can give one example, and then I'll yield to the next person. We haven't heard from you yet, and I would love to hear from you. We had one instance going back to some of our projects. One thing that I like that people do is, first of all, get all the facts and figures together. Compare it to other successful projects that have passed, not just with the administration, but with the city council. So that if individuals say, well, I don't like how this happened, you can go back and say, well, with this public-private partnership, this money was put here, and this money was put here, and we had this longitudinal plan that is in action. So we would like for you to also support this, even if it involves us having site visits and actually seeing it for ourselves. But it's important that the accountability is both ways. Make the elected official accountable for getting the information, and then at the same time, the constituents should also be accountable to make sure that not only they're giving us the information, but we're going back and we're actually synthesizing it so that we can make the best decision possible.
Let me ask you one specific thing from that. You mentioned site visits.
Yes.
So that's, I think, an interesting, question of tactic for people who are, thinking about they want to engage both the elected officials who are with them and maybe those who they don't know about or who may be not with them. I know I get requests all the time, to go out and see something. But I'm also struck by sometimes when I don't get those requests. And I have to say, we have pretty busy schedules, so, scheduling something to actually go out and see something is not necessarily trivial. On the other hand, I think it makes more of an impact than anything else. People have more, I know they have more influence with me after I've stood in the space they're talking about and looked at it and had them talk about it in that context. Right. So I wouldn't personally be inclined to broadcast this, I'm leaving office so I can, but if you had 100 people a week requesting you to do this, you'd have a problem. But we're all in the room here, right? So, but I sort of gave you what my answer to the question is, but address that. What would you say to that about people, should they seek to get you to come out to things? And if so, how should they go about doing it? And how should they handle such a thing?
Oh, I'm about to say, what did I do?
I didn't do anything. I'm just talking out loud.
Well,
I'll let you start with it, but
it has its proponents, but it has its opponents as well. Mostly what I've seen, I can only go by my experience, those elected officials who make themselves tangible are able to get better results than those that are more intangible. I've seen projects, good and bad, to where elected officials who are strong proponents for particular, I'll just give you one good example. The South Memphis Revitalization Plan in Memphis. It encompassed a section of the community which was affected by blight, businesses leaving, and whatnot. You had a nonprofit organization. I know we're getting into one of those other questions, so I'm gonna try to not get too much. But you had public-private partnership. You had universities. You had one of the 501c3s that works with one of the individuals that started this movement. What happened was we had site visits. There are particular council members who went there. Some of them didn't come because some of them weren't invited, like what you said. But at the same time, it's up for those elected officials who were invited to give that information to the whole, because out of the 13 members who serve on the council, 7 votes mean passage if it's in the affirmative. So what I would say is those site visits and the tangibility should be the genesis of the initial communication. And then you go from there And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. You have some elected officials who might not even go to something that might be next door to them. But at the same time, the opponent piece is sometimes when that elected official doesn't go out there and they just go by subjective instead of objective reasoning, sometimes it's not in that elected official's favor, much less the community's favor. I've seen it to where 25 jobs were almost lost because an elected official did not go to a site visit to see what this community was actually doing in her district. And I was like, wait a minute, they invited me, I went out there, what's the issue? So, yeah, it goes back to their accountability.
Charles, feel free to pick up there or anywhere else if the things we've gone over.
I guess on the topic of municipal initiatives that have been approved and are underway, kind of going back to the initial pitch, the two things I think that are important for follow-up from your organizations, one is to offer ways that you can help the municipality evaluate the effectiveness of the rollout. Or if you're into rollout and things are underway, how is something being implemented? How are citizens using the efforts of the project? Which leads to my second point. There's always the next thing that municipalities are working on. So what we do next really ought to be informed by the quality of what we just did. And the more we can evaluate our work, the better the next project is going to be. So the other suggestion then is if your organizations have ideas that are good next steps, in the example of the South Memphis project, if there's another neighborhood in Memphis that needs similar attention, but the implementation gets tweaked a little bit because of things we've learned in South Memphis, that's feedback that I think a municipality really values.
Let me go to the question that was raised earlier by Louis, which has to do with the form of government, and this question about what is the role of the elected official, and if I'm thinking about moving something forward, how do I think about my particular elected leadership, and of course that, as you were suggesting, varies a lot depending on the structure of government, which varies tremendously in the United States at the local level, even within states. And again, I find that people in the community who've lived there a long time don't necessarily focus on that very much. And if they've moved one jurisdiction over, they may be surprised to find that the government doesn't work the way they thought they learned it in the place they were. So that can matter a lot. And the real question is, if I'm talking to an elected official, what can that person do for me? What is their capability? If they're with me, what does that mean? And it may mean a different thing depending on the nature of your government. So, and I it's kind of like to see with the survey we have here. There are rough differences, like the obvious difference between a strong mayor system versus a council manager. My government is an elected county board that appoints a manager. The board itself has no direct power to administer. It has to all go through the county manager. And a lot of times, and my citizens don't necessarily always understand that. They think you can make things happen. And actually, no, a single board member has no power at all. Only a majority of the board has any power. And their power is to direct the manager. Now, that's different in other places. In some places, there are specific responsibilities that go with being elected to a member of a board or council. In some places, there's an elected executive. Let's start with that. How many among you here, how many of your governments are council manager kind of form of government? And to me, so that's 4 of us. And so 2 of you have strong mayor systems.
We have a quote-unquote weak mayor system. We have a quote-unquote weak mayor form of government, but it's probably a little bit different than most people up here, if not every place in the United States, because along with I'm the head of the legislative branch of city government, right? And the mayor's the head of the executive branch. But the difference in St. Louis is we have a board of E&A, which is a board of estimates and apportionment. And as the head of the legislative branch, I sit on that 3-member board with the mayor to oversee spending for the city. So it's a little bit different, and that's why we call it a weak mayor form of government. Mm-hmm. But in practice, it's a very strong mayor form of government because absolutely every resource you can imagine falls under the mayor's direct jurisdiction, right? We passed the budget, and after we pass the budget, it's up to him to implement his policies and mm-hmm. his vision and everything from there forward. But one of the things I have to go back to that I think is important to underscore when you were talking about the site visits, I want everybody in here to understand there is absolutely no substitute for getting that elected official out to your prospective sites. I think at the end of the day, that can make a huge difference one way or the other. And I'll give you a perfect example. St. Louis City is divided, roughly north and south, where we have a dividing line called Delmar, where, the living circumstances of people changes dramatically once you cross this imaginary line. And oftentimes, elected officials within the city of St. Louis, they'll have issues between each other, right, based on what their specific residents want to see. But one of the things that we found that can change that literally overnight is by getting that elected official or that community organization or community leader in a car and taking them to that site and showing them in live and living color exactly what we're talking about. And it 100% of the time it changes them. It begins to give them a different perspective. So I think that there's nothing short of a site visit if you can get it. If they say, well, it'll take 2 months to get on my calendar, not a problem. Let me schedule. Who do I talk to schedule it? If it'll take 3 months, not a problem. Who do I talk to schedule it? And just make sure you engage in that way.
I couldn't agree more. That's very well said.
I want to talk about, I'm elected by the council, so I've had 3 terms as mayor, mm-hmm. elected by the, it's kind of interesting dynamic.
But so you're elected by the people to the council, and the council elects the mayor.
Yeah. And in the Covington situation, you're directly elected, but it's a manager form of government. And if you're looking for champions on elected officials, I think we all deposit. We're not, every council member is not have the same kind of power or influence as others. And if I were sitting in your seat and I'm looking to see a champion for my cause, sustainability, I would look for somebody like Edmund, or just go all down through here, because they have all deposited some sort of political currency, and they have credibility that some of the others do not have. So if you're looking for a champion, look for the personality that you would find in your council. And the other thing I will say about that too is, it needs, how many of us, can I ask a follow-on question?
Sure.
How many of y'all are it's nonpartisan elected? How many are nonpartisan?
Nonpartisan.
On a local level, we don't really need to have Democrats or Republicans necessarily. Now, some of us are Democrats, right, Edmund? But when we are...
What topic you're talking about?
Okay, I understand.
Stuff I'm more conservative.
I am too. But the streets and sustainability is not by party, it's by values. And I think that that's something when you're looking to, we need to make sure that we have both parties represented in a lot of ways. But look to your elected officials who have some I don't want to call it clout, but currency. They can take they can take your project a lot further than some of the others.
As an alert to folks, now is a good time for you to be thinking. In just a moment, I'm going to look out here and see who gets to be the lucky person to ask the first question. Did we mention about the prize for asking? No, I don't think they did.
I would say in our form of government, we have a weak mayor, council manager form of government, but it hit me. I was on the council for 2.5 years, and then a mayor resigned. I came into that position rather quickly with 2 weeks' notice. Like to think that I was glad that happened. If I'd had longer to think about it, might not have done it. But one thing that hit me the first council meeting as mayor was I don't vote. And we had a vote on something I was kind of passionate about, and I went, I was not sure I was comfortable not being able to vote, but I went from a mentality of doing my homework and considering how I felt a project, and that defined my vote, and that was my role, to now I'm very concerned about how everyone else is going to vote, depending on, you know, the direction that you feel your community should go. I think I kind of interjected myself, well, at times probably too much, to the point where, Mayor, you're the chair and we're the ones that vote, but I said I wasn't elected to be a potted plant. You know, I am going to do my homework, I am going to have a vision, I am going to try to take it a direction. So I went from a role of homework for myself and a vote to more of visioning, talking to everyone else on the council, seeing what they thought. If a citizen came with an issue, I might say, this is a good council person for you to talk to, but please talk to everyone. You can have a champion on the council, but that champion needs to communicate with the other council members. They won't always agree, you understand, and I know you do understand that, but I think there needs to be some communication. And I think part of my job, without the vote, is to make sure that that communication happens.
I have a quick question. As far as individuals communicating with each other, does your particular form of government have something that we call the Sunshine Law, to where we're not allowed to talk to elected officials unless we're in a public forum?
Absolutely in a quorum form of government, but I'm real careful with my communication that when I talk to my elected officials, it's in an informative type of, for instance, I don't group email unless it's a piece of information, because I don't want to ever do anything that isn't out in the public totally for discussion. And my council is very sensitive that whatever conversations we may have, because somebody may call us a council person, say, will you talk to this other council person? And you can have those individual conversations. But when it comes to action, all that comes out at the council meeting, and all that discussion comes out. We don't settle something and then come and just vote. That just doesn't happen with us, because my council is real sensitive about that.
And see, that's why I asked the question, because our constituents need to know that, hey, I just can't talk to Mr. So-and-so about this issue unless it's in a public forum. If it's going to go to a vote, we can't discuss it unless we're in a public forum. So that's when
You can't even have a one-on-one discussion?
if we're a part of the same government, no. Now, in Memphis, we have a county commission and
Florida
a city
has that
council.
sort of thing.
I can talk to a county commissioner all day because we're different forms of government.
Right,
But if
right.
it's
But your
someone
fellow
else,
council members, you can't discuss with.
if
outside of
it's
the public
something
meeting.
that's going to be deliberated for future legislation, then no, we can't do that.
The Virginia law is 2. So we're allowed to have, I can talk to one of my colleagues, and then I can go talk to another one, but you can't have more than 2. And this is directly relevant when people want to talk to their elected officials, because they want to go meet with 3 of you. And we have to explain, you can only have 2 of us. And, you want people to come to a particular meeting, only 2 of us can go. A couple weeks ago, I walked into a room, the bunch of citizens were meeting on something, and I thought I was going to go talk with them, and I walked in, I looked in, and I saw 2 of my colleagues were there. I turned around, went back out. But that's the Virginia law. Some places, I think Florida, and, in your situation, it's even more strict than that. But that varies a lot by state and by locality. Tom?
There's many laws, and
Yeah.
and
Open meeting laws vary.
Yeah, and there's sometimes you can go to executive session. You've seen that done, but mostly it's what he did. Deliberation is the word. We can exchange information, but if it leads to deliberation, then you can't do it.
And that's a hard thing to
That's a
distinguish sometimes.
real fine line.
Yeah.
And in Missouri, it's a quorum. We need a quorum. So as long as there's 28 members of the Board of Aldermen, so as long as we have,
So 5 of you could caucus to discuss an issue.
Absolutely.
Yeah, which is
absolutely.
what state legislatures, of course, do.
Yeah.
But most local governments are not allowed to by law passed by state legislatures.
Now, the other challenge is the written law and then the unwritten law and rules of engagement, right? Because I know if in St. Louis, the specific chairman of the committees, they hold a lot of power, right? And even though you won't read anywhere that it's important for you to talk to the chairman if the issue you're talking about or the issue you're looking to introduce will land in his committee, it doesn't say that anywhere. But certainly, if you bring an issue and you're not and you do not pass through the chairman, you don't talk to the chairman of the committee, and it lands there, it's possible that the chairman may not even let it go to a vote. So it's important to understand not just those written laws, but rules of engagement within the specific bodies. And I imagine that that changes, city by city, municipality by municipality. But in St. Louis, I know that that's one important issue, along with aldermanic courtesy. So if it's something specific for your ward and your area, more than likely I won't go against you because it's within your ward or your area, unless it's something that can transcend all of the city. And then finally, I'd say this: as we move out of the city into some of the counties, there's certain phrases that you don't use unless you certainly want it to end. So if I show up with anything with the headline sustainability in certain communities, it is dead on arrival. I mean, you won't have an opportunity no matter what it is. So I think some of those things also.
So if you're taking notes, one thing is know your sunshine open meeting laws. Number two is know the unwritten rules of engagement that apply in any governmental body.
I've got something that just hit me, and maybe just a piece of advice that I follow myself. Email. It's great, but
Yeah.
uh-oh,
I
he
know what
said,
you're going to say.
be careful. I'm very careful how I use it because tone can be interpreted, okay? So, and you're very passionate about sustainability, I am sure. But if you're going to communicate with us or any other issue that has nuances, I try not to stay away from email. I'll pick up the phone and call, and I suggest that that's probably a good thing to do because I've gotten emails from constituents and or, more importantly, somebody supporting something, and I read that email and I go, and then you call them up and they didn't mean that at all.
And some people won't call them up. They'll just be turned off. That is
Now,
an
that
issue.
is the caution for email. You're absolutely right, but it's also a great benefit, especially when I was talking about the accountability working both ways. So if a constituent, like this happened last week to me, and this person said, Councilman Ford, I emailed you last week, and I tell them, okay, what's your name? Huh? Wait a minute, you don't know what your name is? They knew that they probably did not send me an email. But that sometimes happens to where if you don't put this away, if you don't make the accountability both ways, then you could have easily missed, you probably get hundreds. Everybody up here, don't worry about that. Everybody up here probably gets hundreds and hundreds of emails a day. So one or two could fall through the cracks. So I was actually asking that person an honest question. I'm like, okay, I might have missed yours. What is your name? That person was like, I didn't send an email. Oops. I was just trying to start something. So there should be caution, because sometimes somebody will tell me something and I just start typing and start, yeah. Go ahead.
But Councilmember, you're from that new generation we're talking about. You're completely connected. You're managing all the email, Facebook, Twitter, all probably simultaneously.
I do have all three.
And
You're right.
As an IT professional, I have I wish I was on top of it like that, but I have my staff members. I have four email addresses, two public and two personal, and I have staff members that help manage all four of those. So all of my life is open to my staff members, my personal and private emails, my Facebook. They help me with my Facebook. They help me with they manage Facebook. They manage Twitter, LinkedIn, you name it. But all of us hope to get where you are one day, where you just every
Watch what you ask
single
for now.
cycle of it you manage.
Well, there's another side to this too, and I think it's an important thing to remember with email. Now, after some of the news out of New Jersey in the last couple of weeks, maybe everybody knows this, but I'm always amazed at the lessons people don't learn. Many people do not realize that every single email communication with an elected official under most states' Freedom of Information Act laws is public information. It's not just that it could come out in a court case or an investigation. A reporter puts in a FOIA request, they're probably going to see every email you sent to the elected official and the ones they sent back to you. And, there's people out there that have a job to fill space. We used to say ink, but of course it's all digital, right? It's going to their blog, and they're looking for stuff, and they will just, requisition things like this, submit a FOIA. And I know we had a situation, I don't know if any of you had anything like this, where there was a dispute in a neighborhood over a neighborhood traffic calming project. And the people who weren't happy with what the government was doing, and the people they're not happy with are basically administrative staff, people in the public works department essentially, but they're mad at them. And they submitted a FOIA request, and they got all the conversations internally that went on about this issue. And they submitted it to the press, which is basically a blog, and now all these conversations in which basically people who never thought they were talking to the world, they didn't realize they were talking into an open microphone. They thought it was a private conversation among other people in government. And now it's all over everything. And many people do not realize that every single communication you make is liable to appear in the press.
And big hint, even if it's not email, if you think I'm being a total fool, don't say it to me either, simply because, and it's not so much of tracking anymore, it's a fact that your message will be lost, because the minute I think any of us here were an idiot or a fool, your message gets lost. So there's a lot of good ways to frame your message, like Mayor Randleman, did you ever consider that? So yeah, big hint.
We've had several local issues in Brevard and Transylvania County that have been the target of email campaigns. Even in our small community, we had a municipal fluoridation issue a few months ago now, and we're a town of 7,200 people, and we got hundreds of form emails from some from constituents, but some from all over the place. And I just like to advise that that's a really poor way to influence elected officials. If you have something you're trying to accomplish, it needs to take place in the context of a long-term relationship with your elected officials. And so as you are thinking about a strategy on a particular topic, I encourage you to think about how that topic fits into the context of your relationship with that elected official. What is that official's place on the council? What influence does he or she have over other council members? What are their particular favorite topics in the community? What are the things they're hearing about from their constituents on a kind of chronic basis that you might be able to at least be sympathetic to, but maybe even help them address. So one other thing I'd like to mention about cultivating these relationships, this kind of goes back to the idea of site visits and how you educate an elected official about your particular issues. We have a lot of groups in our community. For as small as we are, it's astounding how many groups will have a social event as a way to kind of educate elected officials. And I would be very careful about how your plan for accomplishing the delivery of information. Socials are socials. It's a good way to meet people, but it's not a great way to convey information. And if you're trying to really influence an elected official, you certainly need to get to know them, but don't think of a social as a a way to really inform them about what you're trying to accomplish. It's part of the picture, but it's not the most important part when it comes down to really having an advocate on an elected body.
And this is where, and I'll be
Sure,
quick,
go ahead.
30 seconds. This is where the first part of what you said, the technology piece that's sometimes good is also sometimes bad. Because when we get emails, and I know some people have probably seen this happen, those elected officials or those who may have participated in what I'm about to say, you might have something, for example, such as the revitalization of Elvis Presley Boulevard. And you will have individuals that will create a portal
Yeah, you go to.
and a web address where all you have to do is type your name and email address. The letter in support or not support is already typed up. So all you have to do is just type your email address, hit enter, and it goes directly to the elected official. We probably get, council members, about 5 to 1,000 emails on one particular item to where the constituent is not taking his or her perspective. They're just going to a portal saying, here's my email address, send, boom. And we appreciate the concern on that particular topic, but it doesn't help the elected official where we might have something that'll get lost in the cracks.
Yeah.
When you have 1,000 blasted emails on one item and you can't find the other things and get those done, especially, and then when you have your staff and your staff's like, oh my goodness, I got all of these. But the good thing about Outlook now is if it has the same title, you can actually have it go to the junk mail, but you got to catch it first, otherwise you'll lose everything.
Yeah, it's hard to say,
Yeah.
to convey how irritating that is when you just get flooded with a form email over and over and over again. It just fills your box. It doesn't, and you know, to some degree you're impressed, but on the other hand, you don't know where all these things are coming from. They may be coming from out of your jurisdiction or all over the country, which happens, and then you're just annoyed. Chris Fornish has the first question from the room, I believe.
I'm so tempted to ask it myself, but I am going to let that privilege go to one of our team members here, Natalie from Covington, right?
So quick question about, I mean, the work of sustainable communities takes time, and it's across terms. So I'm curious if you have any advice in terms of, one, managing expectations in terms of how long it's going to take for the work to actually get done, and then for the actual elected officials to think beyond their term.
Two comments about that. One is to really have a strategy for being involved in campaigns. I know that can be a dicey issue for nonprofit organizations because you want to maintain some political objectivity. But you can be a conduit for information for your community and host candidate forums and give potential candidates an opportunity to meet voters and also learn about your initiatives. The other thing you can do in the background is look for candidates. Figure out who's got an itch to run and find somebody to go talk to them. It may not need to be your executive director, but it can be somebody close to your organization, a board member or somebody.
We have set up a volunteer board, the city does, for sustainability. And that goes beyond the elected officials. And what has happened, the elected officials and Oak Ridge have voted on a sustainability plan. So what happens if you get people to vote on something, there is some ownership because then you have to communicate. You have to tell them in big, broad terms what you want to accomplish. It gets voted on, so it has a discussion, and then you have the volunteer citizen board appointed by these elected folks that have voted on your plan. And there's a possibility, I think you've got some longevity that can be built in that way, and I think that's happened with us. Catherine, would you agree? Catherine Baldwin, I always check with the staff because I'll go on to the next thing, so her head was going up and down, so thank you, Catherine.
Yeah. The other thing is, we heard yesterday that 50% of your budget or whatever should be spent on communications. You should have a communication plan in place. That's absolutely critical because I think that that adds to the longevity of your project or whatever you're working on. If you want to transcend just the elected official, right? The elected officials are going to be elected by the people. They're going to stay in office or be booted out of office by the people. And if the people believe in your project, if the people are on board your project because you have communicated all the aspects of your project, you've measured it, you've communicated out the successes, you've shown the growth and progress of your project, any elected official that comes in office, if the guy or girl, the person that you were working with is no longer in that seat, that other person that's in that comes into that seat more than likely will be, at least willing to work with that project or keep it online and keep it going if the majority of the public is behind it. So I think that is absolutely critical.
One thing that is turned important to us, and you ask a very good question, because when you talk about the length of time, it is a process. One thing is staff leadership. Sometimes staff tends to outlive the electeds in their tenure with a community. So we embarked on some education with our staff, and that helped bring things a long way. I have a little personal story with my public works director, who, when I first started talking about sustainability, said, Ruth, you going to bring a bunch of environmental wackos to town? I said, yes, I am, because the crime rate will be low. It'll be good. It'll be a good thing. But he came around. He's a good advocate for it now. We've done some training. Our police chief has seen some things. The engineer that we contract with has gotten quite interested in this over a walkability audit that we did. And one thing that's helped us is we actually branded our community as Carlisle the Natural Choice. And I've seen that have influence. Our planning and zoning chair actually said at a meeting, which I thought was a great stride for us, we had a sustainability project, and he kind of looked around the table and said, I think we should approve this. This is what our community's about. And that we have come leaps and bounds from when it was just kind of a gleam in a couple of our eyes, when we started the process. But it's about education and branding and to the point of communication big time. So.
Yeah, I want to underscore that because I think that there's a tendency to think, well, we have short election cycles in this country, and elected officials are focused on what they have to do for the next one. And there's a degree to which that is true, and elected officials very much feel the pressure to what am I going to talk about, the next time I'm up. On the other hand, I don't think you should underestimate the importance of legacy to people who run for public office, and that a great many of them are thinking about, when I quit, is this going to have mattered? They may be thinking about it because they want to run for something else, and years later they got a long-term plan, but they may just be thinking about it because they live in that community, they cared about it in the first place, and they really do want it to have mattered. So I think that is important to keep in mind. I also think that a large part of success over time goes to some of the things that Ruth was getting at, which is, it's not just a matter of convincing the 5 people on a 7-member council to vote for something because then you got the votes and it happens. That's obviously fundamental. But it's really about building enough support that all those people want to vote for it. And that the community begins to identify with it, that it's not only identified with a particular elected official, but that it has, you have that branding that you were talking about. You may have championed thing to start with, but it starts being something other people have ownership of. And that's the real trick. And that actually is one of the key things that an elected official can bring. They can help make something that other people identify with, and using them to do that is probably the most valuable thing you can do. Because when they're gone, whether they've moved on to another office or they've left or something like that, what you have left is, that strength, that common sense of a commitment to something that was bigger than one person. And that is really the most powerful thing, so that the next person who runs sees that as something to run on, or sees that they have to because there's a constituency out there that owns the thing. And so it's closely related. They're not separate things, the support in the public and the elected official. They're really closely related.
And part of that process is like with my public works director who's come around. He's a great guy, but I think misconceptions in the beginning start to go away the more people that gravitate to the concept and try to actually, understand it for what it is and what it is not. And that
Hold your mic
A little closer.
Oh,
It's not
I was
real
going to say
strong.
then if you start with people that are willing, like my public works director, to really have an open mind and embrace it and learn about it, that just has a ripple effect, and the next person has another ripple effect, and so it's kind of that ripple effect that we kind of used. I don't know if that's successful other places, but.
Tom, and then we'll take another question.
Yeah, I'm going to follow on a little bit to the storytelling piece. There's a group of site selection folks that come to Knoxville every year, and their job is to place new industries in wherever community they're looking at. And I learned a lot about that because I get invited. We have a regional approach. I'm trying to see where our folks are at. And I go down there along with the economic developers and talk to them. And they're sending a pretty strong message. They're saying that they want communities that understand sustainability because they're looking for quality of life issues. They're going to hire people who want to move to a place like you're talking about. And it's real interesting that the change that's happening, I think that we're catching up to, that if your community wants to really start to strive economically, you have to have some of these amenities in place, because that's where the businesses are going to locate, because they're going to be able to hire people who want to live in those areas. It's kind of an interesting thing that I'm seeing happening. So I just pass that along.
Okay, who's next? Over here.
Actually, I had a couple of questions, but I think I'll ask this first one. First of all, just a little bit about your style of management. Are you a hands-off, hands-on politician? I mean, you have to know everything that goes on and every bug that moves. And then secondly, trust and accountability with professional staff. How much do you trust staff with the information? Do you have to trust but verify, or how do you handle that?
So you're asking, are we micro and macro managers? I think that's the first question. I can only speak for myself. I have a great staff. I have to actually share my staff with 2 other council members. I know some legislatures you have like 10, 11, 12 people. You might have just one person. I actually share mine with others. So we have a great communication via email. I go into the office probably 3 or 4 days a week. And when I do that, I don't have to do more than if I only went in one time every 2 weeks, because our council only meets first and third Tuesdays. The council members are not subject to particular times. We have to have office hours and whatnot. I just choose from 7 to 2, go to school. From 2:30 to 5, I go into the office. I just want to get stuff done. I don't like stuff stacking up. And as far as my relationship with my staff, I tell the people that call in, if they want to contact me, I'm going to tell my staff stuff anyway. So, for example, there was something that happened around 9 o'clock, and they were like, well, we'll wait until he gets into the office. I'm like, well, you could easily just contact my staff, and then by the time school is over, it's probably already done. So each council member has his or her own style. I know some might be macro managers. Some are micro managers where they just have to have every little thing done, and they have to manage the small things from the schedules to everything like that. But it all depends. I mean, I can only speak from my perspective. I have a great staff. I always ask them, I say, look, if a constituent comes in and they say this, that, and the other, if you have the documentation saying that you did these things, then I'll back you up 100%. But if there's something that you didn't do, let me know in advance so that I can do what I need to do accordingly, because the last thing that I don't think any of us want to do is, and it goes back to something that happened before, if somebody did not know that a particular staff person did something, and then you're out there in the limelight like the deer with the lights on, you never want to have that at all. So that's just my perspective. I don't know how everybody else's is, but I'm looking forward to hearing.
Well, I'm envious of your staff. In Brevard, council members don't have staff. And I really thought your question was about the city employees. Okay. So My perspective on staff is to know, first of all, that I was elected to be a city councilman. I wasn't elected to be the manager, the planning director, the public works director, Parks and Rec. I mean, so it's important for me just to remember what I was asked to do. So the role that I take with city staff, and it's always through the manager, to make sure he knows that I understand his position and his authority. But my role with city staff is to be a source of feedback. So if I'm hearing consistent messages about the delivery of city services, whether it's rolling services or how we do zoning processes, I want to make sure that our organization is getting feedback so it can be a better organization. And I think for organizations, for sustainability organizations, it's important to know how that quality improvement works in your local government. Who are the people that can make things better in terms of how services are delivered? Because sometimes there's an opportunity for you to plug in there. And governments, despite a lot of the rhetoric, just want to do good work. So it's important to give that feedback when you have it.
Okay, I'm going to ask if we can go. We want to get a few more questions in, so if we could go to the audience.
I think that you all said this in your own way. Councilmember Landreth, I think you specifically articulated that you got to think about the long game and the long-term productive relationship. So if I'm a member of a community organization, or maybe even I'm an agency staff person who's somewhat removed from, even the person who does oversight over my department, or maybe I'm a member of the business community, what is the way that I can get into the sweet spot so that my emails and communications and requests for site visits or meetings are, don't fall through the cracks or don't end up, at the bottom of 300 others. So should I be trying to get you information and opportunities? And if it's opportunities, what kind of opportunities? Should I be providing some kind of cover when you stick your neck out on my issue? But what are the ways that I can become an asset and valuable to you so that we can start building that long-term productive relationship?
One thing that works in a small community of my size is individuals that are willing to help me, like on my boards and commissions, or give me input, or when I need some input that you have the expertise in, and I come to you. If I can see that there's an interest and an engagement and a true commitment to the community, I'm very responsive because I know that the homework will be done, the passion's there, the interest is there. So sometimes it's about engaging with the elected official, not just on the subject that you have at the moment, but continually along the way to at least show support and offer if you don't think, if you have some concerns or issues on a subject as well, to offer both of that all along the way, rather than just wait for, here's this one issue and I got to get to the council and I got to make this happen. And now I'm suddenly kind of desperate about this. That kind of helps.
I want to underscore that. Never underestimate the power with an elected official of the fact that somebody they think of as a supporter cares about something.
Exactly.
And, whatever else, somebody, I just know you're somebody who's, I know is with me, and you want to talk to me about an issue. Now I think I have to care about that issue on some level. That is really very powerful.
I also think it's important to, do your research and understand what drives that elected official. Is it education? Is it jobs? Is it housing? Find out what drives that elected official. And then take a look at the specific project or initiative that you're working on. And take a look at how that project or issue that you're working on can help to underscore what they're truly passionate about. When they roll out of bed in the morning, and the reason they go out and take shots from the press and everything else is because at the end of the day, after performing that job for 1 term, 2 terms, 3 terms, or whatever, they feel like they have made some measurable difference in, let's say, education. So if I'm working on a housing issue and I jump on the internet and I take a look at the Facebook and tweets and everything else that's out there available on a specific elected official, and I find out that that elected official has given his life, his or her life to education, and I'm working on a housing issue, when I bring that housing issue to them, you can better believe that the papers and everything that I hand to them and the subject matter, and when I'm talking to them, I'm going to talk to them about how this housing issue is going to help education. It's going to help, help stop some of the turnover in the transient population. It'll help to, solidify the tax base or whatever. Begin to talk along those terms, and in sustainability, almost whatever project you're working on, you can almost hit any one of those sweet spots. I think it's important to understand that.
Got a question over here.
I think we have time for one more question, and that privilege goes to Larissa.
Thank you. What particular role do each of you play in advocacy on the behalf of your community at either the state or the federal level?
Even on a small community, I'm very grateful for my region because they're very inclusive of all the communities. They're on board. So I just have a goal that I'm the presence for the community, mostly because my council, as a small community, they got day jobs and I don't have a life, so I can show up at all this stuff. I think it's real important. It's real important to be. I represent at the county level, at the state level, quite a bit at the regional level, simply because I'm not offering myself as the most talented individual in any of those roles. But I think it's really important to be present and to know that your community is interested in these things and they're ready to participate and just be part of the process. So I think that's hugely important to have that presence at all those levels. Just to keep your, like I said, as a representative, that your community is willing to participate and interested.
Tom?
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I was the past president, Tennessee Municipal League, and Municipal League are the local elected officials, and that's where I met Edmund. And because of that, I'm on the board of that. And our city even hires we have two lobbyists, one in D.C. and one in Nashville, and they set, and I participate in that. I chair a couple of national, and by doing that, it's kind of crazy, but you build relationships doing that. So once you're in that position, they say, yeah, that's the mayor of, pick your town, but they've had this position, and therefore you've represented this statewide organization, which helps your community when it comes to issues you're dealing with. So I think that's really, really important. I chair a thing now. Oak Ridge is where the Oak Ridge National Lab is, Manhattan Project, and we depend on a lot of federal influence. So I chair a thing called the Energy Community Alliance, which is local elected officials that have DOE facilities. And therefore, we have to make sure that we're taken care of because we're host community. So I think that's part of it. And I'll bet you go through here and you'll find every one of these folks that are sitting here are involved in some other regional or national or state. It's important for your community. It brings you rewards back to your town.
And I know that's a major part of my role has been as, regional representative and, our members certainly before the state legislature, but the participation in regional bodies especially gives you a whole set of relationships. That's a really important part of our function.
A lot of this is about relationships, and I think that theme has gone through this whole,
That's right.
there's certain people you trust. I think that in the ones that, if you want to really get to somebody that I know that I trust, find somebody who worked on my campaign. That's a very special relationship, isn't it, folks? And they have put some blood, sweat, and tears in you. So therefore, and I'll pick somebody out from Covington, if Tom DeBello right here was to call me and I was on council, I would listen to him. He runs the Center for Great Neighborhoods, and I did back in the day. Or, what'd you say? No, you're not moving.
Charles gets the next to last word.
My involvement in North Carolina outside of Brevard is on the board of our Council of Governments, which led our sustainability project. And I'm also a member of the Planning and Environment Legislative Action Committee for the which is organized by the North Carolina League of Municipalities, which is a great way to be connected with policy people who tend to have a lot of great data, which I value quite a bit. And it also puts me in contact with our legislative delegation. While I can see them in town, they really appreciate when you take the effort to drive to Raleigh to see them there, because they're making that effort as well. So,
Having the prerogative for the last shot, I want to try and leave you with one last thought, and I hope you found some of the ideas here useful. But one thing that I don't know we made explicit in this conversation that is really important and often overlooked. When you're working and you know who your elected leader champions are, the people who you're counting on, and particularly the people you've always been able to count on. They do the right thing, and you just know they will, and they're good, and you have those folks. Basically, these folks, and you always have those. And your role may be more or less openly political. Many of you, it can't be political at all, but you play a role, and you communicate with other people. One of the most important things to remember in this as you go forward, and we're all dealing with issues of various kinds of opposition, whether it's the usual kind of resident anxiety or actually organized opposition that may have other motivations, you need to remember that part of your job in this is to help protect your elected official. That when you have somebody who's out there, they may seem like they're just invincible. They're so good, and you're going to win on the issue because in fact they have tremendous influence and people have respect for them and all that. You don't really have to worry about them. Haven't had a serious challenge in a long time. Never take that for granted. Part of the effectiveness of a politician is creating that image that they're invincible. And we would never want to show that we were anything else. We're not worried. We're not scared about anything. But you should never believe that. You should keep in mind that every single attack that goes against your elected official is ultimately an attack on what you're trying to do. And whether you're in a position where you can overtly support somebody, or you can more subtly do it, or you can make sure other people know that they should be supporting somebody who's doing a good thing and taking some shots for it. One of the things we all find is that people who are angry come to meetings to talk. They come and testify. People who are happy, they stay home and watch the game. And it is very important that you remember at all times you want to protect the elected officials who are your champions in any way it is appropriate for you to do in your role, whatever that way may be. That was what I wanted to leave as the last thought with you, and I hope you will join me in thanking this panel for being here today. Mr. Fardash, back to you.